Welcome to Goalie Science, a show where we talk about all things goalies and sometimes a little bit science. Presented by Resilient Hockey, your premier hockey rehabilitation experts, I think. I'm Ben Cernick. I'm here with Jamie Phillips. Jamie, how you doing?
I'm good, Ben. We are the premier rehab experts. Although, what we do need to make us more premier is a intro song. I feel like all
Yeah,
good podcasts have an intro song.
that's not true at all. But it
How do
also,
you know?
I didn't know. Yes. Yeah, if the people at NPR are listening, send us
Wait, I
your.
listened to a bunch of NPR podcasts, and a lot of them have theme songs.
Yes, I was saying we'll get the people over at NPR to the
Although,
people over at the indicator to give us their theme song. So
although NPR did cut a bunch of podcasts, and one of them was one of the ones I like, Louder Than a Riot,
ooh.
and kind of bummed about that. But no one's here to listen to us talk about public radio.
You're right, Jamie. Today we're going to talk about something that I think is interesting, and I hope you think is interesting. I think you'll have a personal say in this one, but I think this is a question that people naturally want to talk about and want to bring up. So hopefully today we're going to dive into a little bit of some specific things, but also blend that in to hear about your experiences, especially as it pertains to what we're talking about today. And what we're talking about today is the American Hockey League a good place for goalies to develop? So, Jamie, before I talk about anything, before I talk about any background information, tell us, did you play in the American Hockey League?
I did, Ben.
How long, Jamie? Give us a little, those who don't know. If somehow you've been listening to this for a little while and you don't know that Jamie played in the American Hockey League for the Manitoba Moose, now's your chance to find out more about it. Jamie, go ahead.
Played for 2 years. I was up and down for most of those 2 years between the East Coast League and the American League. I don't really know. I'm sure Ben knows how many games I played. Statistically, I was above average. No, I was about average. I don't know if I was above average. I was about average. Whatever my goalie Comrie, we had about similar numbers. No, I didn't get a ton of wins. Yeah, I did play. And I think, I know that you're looking right now for those answers, but I think in terms of your question, is the American League good for goalies? And I think the answer again is it depends.
Okay. Well, we're going to ignore you saying it depends. But for those who are immediately curious, Jamie's first year, 11 games, 906 save percentage. We don't talk about goals against average here. Jamie, that's pretty good. Manitoba Moose, second year, 27, 2018, 16 games played, 912 your second year. Jamie, those are good numbers. Congratulations.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, they don't mean anything now, so that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything to take away from this is that maybe numbers aren't the whole story, unfortunately, right? So, to actually,
Ben, you brought this up to me, so I'm
yeah,
curious to know, as someone who didn't play in the American Hockey League and
I
someone who
did.
is very good at stats, why is this on your mind?
Okay, so to give people a little bit of background, there is a couple of things. So one, there's this idea that goes around, and a lot of people hear this. You hear it in the goalie world, you hear it in just the hockey world, is that goalies take longer to develop. Jamie, have you heard that before?
I have heard that before. I've also heard the average age of a starter is what, like 28?
Yeah. So, and what's interesting is when you start looking, and I say start looking, but there is, I've referenced this before, but the Hockey Viz website, Micah Blake McCurdy, is a public hockey analyst, hockey statistician, whatever you want to call him, and has done some work on this idea of aging curve. So, like, what year of age is a player the most valuable? And it's always really interesting for forwards and defensemen. It's a lot younger than you think it is. You get your most average value out of a forward and defenseman like pretty early in their career, like 22, 23. And the reason that is a lot of guys don't stick around in the league, right? Like players get their chances a little bit earlier than goalies. And so they play a couple seasons, they're up and down in AHL, NHL. And then Jamie, as you know, a lot of times guys get tired of that pretty quick and they're off to the Dell in Germany, or they're on to the SHL, where they can have more reliable pay, more reliable hockey, just a different lifestyle, right? And we see that
Yeah.
all the time. There's lots of people who have 100 NHL games on their career, who have 300-400 European games on their career as well, right? That's just natural. Some people you might even remember as like, oh, I love that player when he played for X team. When you go look at their page, you realize they only played 100 games for that team, and then they've left the NHL. But tying this all back in, so players a little bit earlier, but when you look at this work, we see that the goalies are most valuable or provide their best value to a team in terms of performance at the age of around 26, which is interesting to me. And the reason I think that is it ties into that earlier question where people say goalies take longer to develop. But I think, like you said, most guys just don't get a lot of chances before then, right? Like you rarely will ever. When's the last time we saw a goalie under the age of 20 play a game in the NHL? A game. Can you think of one off the top of your head? Marc-Andre Fleury? Is it Fleury, the last one?
Fleury. How old? DiPietro was grabbed at a junior.
Yeah, but I mean, we could just look it up.
We could look it up.
Right, but like off the top of my head, this could have been a question that we could have looked up, but it's traditionally
Not
it's
often.
older. Yeah, it's not often, right? It's again, and there's less goalies drafted. There's less spaces on a roster to play a goalie. Obviously, only a goalie plays a game, and so that plays a factor. But we're entering now multiple seasons in a row where there's been over 100 goalies who have played at least a game in the NHL. So this idea that we're not, there's not enough chances or not enough opportunities for people to play at least a game, that is changing, right? But the biggest problem we see is like, well, where do you put your team's goalies if they're not in the NHL? And well, it's the AHL or it's the ECHL unless they're a college goalie that you can leave in college, or they're a European goalie who has a contract on a team that they're willing to stay with. But even then, sometimes teams want to bring them over, right? And so this ties us getting back into the AHL because that's a lot of the time where you're going to put your guys, right? Makes sense. Or they're going to the coast. And Jamie, you also played in the ECHL. How's that as a goalie?
It is way harder than the American League, surprisingly. Most people don't understand that, but it is significantly more challenging as a goalie to adjust and read. But I think the one thing that I want to make sure we stay on the path here is, although I played in those leagues, this isn't an N=1 discussion. This isn't just because I didn't, play in the NHL that all of a sudden the American League is bad for development, because that's, I think Ben and I are going to disagree on this topic. But I think I want to preface that. And so I know Ben's going to have some stats to back it up. But when it comes to my question to you, Ben, is, do you have any data that shows, do goalies actually get better in the American League, or is it just mainly opportunity with an NHL team and these goalies are already good? They just play in the American League because they have to, because there's no spots. And then if they're given an opportunity, they just play the same. And that's still the same caliber that would have been, in the American League or the NHL. It's just the same thing, just different league. And that's what I'm curious about.
Well, I had some numbers pulled up. This is some preliminary stuff. This is nothing in depth at all. So today's going to be a really superficial glance at it. But let's start with this. Jamie, I'm going to give you goalie A and goalie B. All right? Goalie A, 33 games, 2.63 goals against average, 911 save percentage. Okay. Goalie B, 35 games played, so two more, 2.64, so 0.01 goals more per game, and a 911 save percentage. So the exact same. Do you care who you take superficially looking at that information? Does that matter to you? No, it shouldn't, right? Well, one of them's Dustin Tokarski, and the other one's Jesper Wallstedt.
Take Jesper Wallstedt.
You take Jesper Wallstedt, yeah. I mean, I would say the Minnesota Wild are pretty happy with their goaltending situation, considering Fleury and Gustafsson are having an absolute tear in the second half of the season, and then they have Jesper Wallstedt in the AHL. But the reason I introduced that as like the first thing is, Jamie, do you know how old Dustin Tokarski is now?
He's an 87.
Is he? Yeah. Oh, 89, 33.
Is he 89?
Yeah, 89. Either way, but Dustin Tokarski, guy's played a bunch of NHL games. 80 of them, in fact. But you have him playing 33 games in the AHL this year, right? That's a 33-year-old who's been up and down in his career, who's occupying a roster spot on your AHL team.
Yeah.
Right? And so the reason I introduced that is, in my head, if you are an NHL team that has a affiliated AHL team, your goal, especially on the goaltending front, should be giving your younger guys an opportunity to develop. Right? But we run into this issue of AHL teams are businesses too. They also need to win. And Dustin Tokarski is objectively like a qualified pretty good goalie. Like that there's this is no slight on him in any capacity. Um, but that kind of raises the question when you start looking throughout the league as well. Right now, at the top of the AHL, this league, you're hearing names like Dustin Wolf and Joseph Woll. I think both of these goalies are excellent. I think Joseph Woll in the NHL has been really good. I think the fact that Dustin Wolf hasn't played any games in Calgary this year for the Flames is potentially less good. But it's the argument is that he's young, but Dustin Wolf is probably the best goal in the AHL right now. And the Flames are battling for a playoff spot, and there's apprehension to give a young guy a chance. Right now, is it because we got to wait and hold on to him, or he's not ready? I mean, he's got a 932 in the AHL. He's had a 925 or greater in the last 5 seasons of his life in the WHL and the AHL.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else he can do. And you've talked about this, right? You talked about this in other podcasting settings where sometimes there isn't anything you can do. You can literally, you're just stuck being told where you're going or what you're playing, how you're playing, right? But as you keep chipping down the list, pretty quickly in Hershey this year, Hunter Shepard, he's a 95. He's 27, turning 28 this year, right?
But Duluth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head. You might know that better than me, actually.
I think he's a Duluth guy.
Yeah, he was. His last season was 2019, 2020 in Duluth, right? But he's another guy. He's been AHL, ECHL since 2020, 2021, which is obviously an impacted season to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he's 28. What's the window there for getting? He's got 0 NHL games, right? But he's having a pretty good season. You keep going down that list. You got Jonas Johansson in Colorado. He's turning 28 this year too.
He's played NHL games though.
Johansson, how many games has he played?
He did not do very well in his games.
Yeah, no, that. I mean,
because he was with Buffalo and then Colorado, and then he's back with Buffalo.
Yeah, he's in Colorado again. He's with the Eagles. He's got 3 games with the Avs this year. But yeah, he's 28. He's played 35 NHL games, right? It's one of those things where how much runway is there? Because there's always younger guys coming up, and that's just the reality of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of list keeps kind of chipping away, and there are some young guys, but again, Joey Decord's on this list, right, for the top AHL performing goalies too. Now, Joey Decord's got some NHL games as well, but he's a 96. He's turning 27 this year, right? It's we have this issue where if you're a second or third round NHL pick and you're coming from the Canadian Hockey League, right? You're coming from the O or the Q or the WHL. You can't play after 20, your 21-year-old year, and most guys don't stick around who are drafted for that OA year anyways. So they need to go find a place to play. So if you're a team that selects one of those guys, you need a spot for them, right? And I think in the AHL right now, you have a lot of these guys who bounce up and down, and that might be a really important role for an organization to have that bounce guy, that guy who can play 6-7 games for you, who's in his late 20s or early 30s. That might be what your team needs. But I think inherently, that guy's going to play a bunch of games in the AHL, and then that might bump one of your young guys down to the ECHL. And as you mentioned, I think the ECHL is a really hard league to play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For what you've told me, from what others have told me, it is a hard league for goalies. It is unpredictable. There is offensive focus for most players on the ice, including the defensemen, because they're looking for points too. So my initial interpretation of this is there's just a lot of still what I would say past that 26-year-old NHL significance peak in the AHL, playing lots of games, playing a little bit up and down. And I don't know how good that is for development. I don't. That's where I'm at, Jamie.
What are teams supposed to do with these goalies is the ultimate question. So
right.
I think the best case scenario for most goalies is when they sign with an NHL team, that NHL team is bad for a few years. Because the more the team does not make playoffs, the more opportunities you have to play. But let's just say you are a top tier goalie and you have been signed to a top tier team with 2 bona fide NHL guys that are on long deals, like a Vasilevsky type of deal. And the backup is someone who's a team guy, supports, who's their backup right now? Brian Elliott, been around for forever. Will he ever be a starter again? Probably not. But guys love him, and he's a good guy, and you know what you're going to get. But if you're a high goalie draft pick and you're playing in Syracuse, what what are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to get traded? Like I think it's people often are under the assumption that just because you're a high like quality prospect, that everything is going to be okay and you're going to get thrown in the net like Carter Hart or Carey Price or Marc-Andre Fleury. But it's really, really not the case, because it's not as if, 3, 4 goalies rotate every single night like they do in baseball. It's you have one guy who's the starter, maybe you have a 1A, 1B, and then the GMs are like, well, he's not ready. What does that mean? Oh, we don't want to, like shell shock him or break him in too early. Well, what does that mean? There's all these things that come into play that we can't really quantify, because to be frank, a lot of them are dumb. Not the GMs. The reasons that these things happen are dumb, and they're dumb because they're uncontrollables.
Yeah.
And it's one of those ones where you just shrug your shoulders and go, well, that's dumb. And it's tough. It's tough for goalies because there's always new goalies coming in. And then you have guys like the Picards, the Tokarskis, the ones that are career AHL guys that haven't gone to Europe, that take up a roster spot in the American League because teams know what they're going to get. And if they need to call someone up, they know, and they need to play some games. You know how Dustin Tokarski is going to go. You know how Picard's going to play. Like, you know how these guys, the Michael Hausers, you know how they're going to do. So it's like, do we start with something new or do we go with old reliable? And it's hard. It's a very hard decision for GMs, and it puts a lot of goalies, or almost all the goalies, in hard situations.
Well, Jamie, you mentioned, first of all, I agree with you entirely. This podcast is not about having answers, because I don't have any.
There is, if someone's listening to the very end, thanks for listening, but there's going to be no answers. It's just, it's not the question isn't, is the AHL good for goalie development? The question is, what do we do with all these goalies?
Yeah. Well, so here's where we go from here, right? You brought up the Tampa Bay Lightning. You brought up their goalie situation. They have Andrei Vasilevsky, who actually kind of had a bad game last night. So we're recording this on Thursday. He let in a goal from like the half wall below the hash marks, no screen, no tip. So like on the wall below the hash mark short side. Like, he just got beat so clean. Shorts. It was, I've never seen him letting a goal like that. Doesn't matter. But an example in Tampa Bay, Jamie, do you have any idea who has played the most games in Syracuse this year? For Syracuse?
No idea.
It's Max Lagacé. He's your age.
Oh.
Yep.
I didn't know he was still playing, to be honest. I remember him when he was in Texas.
He's in Syracuse, 37 games played. Not having, admittedly, a great season. 335, 887, but that's pretty superficial, right? That's not really a deep dive in anything. But this is the exact thing. This is where maybe this is part of the answer too, is getting goalies in. But the goalie who's played the second most games in Syracuse is Hugo Almfelt. He's 21. He's played 31 games in the AHL this year. It's a third round draft pick from 2019. And so maybe, again, so now you have a guy he's having a pretty good year. 31 games played, 910 save percentage. But you have a guy, like, maybe the whole point is you only play him, 35, 40 games, right? Maybe that is a very intentional thing. Like, the AHL approach is, you know what, 40 games will be good for the development for our goalie, for our young goalies. Get him used to the American game coming over from Sweden. I've heard that be a thing that's been talked about Askarov and Wallstead is the adjustment to a North American style game. And so maybe that is the right approach, but at the same time, again, it's right. Like, maybe, I don't know, I don't know people's mindsets in the professional ranks all the time, but I think a lot of the time you want to play more. Am I wrong to say that? Like, if I say you could play 30 games or 50, what would have you rather have done in your situation? Serious question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like, I think if you want, inherently, when you think about it, like, more games to a certain degree
allows you to showcase yourself.
Right. And allows you to, in theory, develop, right? Because we've talked about this in our previous podcast, where you can work on reading and anticipating plays and the components of those plays, but you don't see the sum of all those parts unless you see them in games at full speed, right? We have talked about this. I think we're both on the same page for that, right? So there's probably this magic sweet spot of how many games encourages development, right?
Mhm.
But there's also the same time, like there's, okay, you have a 21-year-old goalie. You don't want them first season in North America. Or second season in North America. You don't want them to get hurt. So you don't, you play in less games because you're less likely to get hurt if you play less. And so there's probably this sweet spot here. But again, I don't know what that number is, right? Like, is 20 AHL games enough for a guy to develop over a season?
I mean, my answer is probably no, especially you play what, 74 in the American League?
Don't quote me. I have no idea.
Something around that, something around the 70s. Depending if you're in the California division, then you play less. If you have, let's just say 70, 70 games, and you have two solid goalies on NHL deals, you can divide that equally by two to get 35 and 35 and allow both to develop. Now, I know it's a business as well. You need to win. Yeah, it's tough because we talk about development for young goalies. A lot of it comes from, experience. And I do think to a degree that exists for high-level goalies as well. But my thing is that I think a lot of these guys that are NHL caliber goalies that are stuck in the AHL are not actually getting better. They're already at their highest caliber. They just haven't got the opportunity. And so they're just playing. They're playing in the American League, and they're getting a little better, and maybe they're getting worse. Like, it's hard to tell, but they're already at almost their highest potential. I think very rarely do we see a goalie who, maybe starts in the NHL, even just starts in the NHL as a rookie and gets better and better and better. You start in the NHL, if you stick around, you tend to be pretty good. Like Shesterkin or Sorokin start when they got to the NHL, they've been pretty good.
They also came from playing professional hockey, right? And that's where I think there's also that, and this is, the conversation we saw, recently Devin Levi has made the jump straight from college to playing some NHL games with no AHL games in between. He's 21. I think he turns 22 this year. That's a big jump, right? I would argue that going from the NCAA to the NHL is a very big jump.
Yes.
Right. But again, it makes sense for Buffalo's situation. Truthfully, I'm happy he's playing there. I think if Buffalo puts him in the AHL next year, I think that's a huge red flag. Like, I don't think there's any reason. But that's what I mean. Like, but that's what but they shouldn't. Why? Right. Like, what does he have? Where do you have better resources? In the NHL or the AHL?
Yeah, the NHL.
Right. Where you're treated better. You have more access to everything. Again, Jamie, I know there's a big difference in practice time, like physical practice time between the ECHL and the AHL, correct? Like, you practice more in the ECHL than you do in the AHL. Am I wrong to say that?
Depending on your team, but yes, there have been times where every practice was 2 hours in the East Coast League.
That's a different conversation. Right? But like, so that's what I mean from a development standpoint, right? Like, it's games, opportunities. It's what you think you need to develop. Is that working with your goalie coach or goalie sessions or availability? Again, like, some ECHL teams don't have a goalie coach, right?
Most.
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
Yeah, right? So it's like, and again, like I would say all AHL teams, I don't have a fact check on this, so please fact check me. All AHL
there's
teams,
no way that.
Yeah, there's no way they don't.
Every NHL team's got a development guy. There's none of them. There's no way any of them don't.
Yeah, right. And again, I've known some guys who worked for the Marlies over the years, and so that's where I'm coming from. Like, well, they've always had a goalie person. But like, again, even tying this back to this, right? Like, I'm looking at this top 10s games played list, and there's a lot of young goalies in the AHL who are in this top 10s for games played. I think that's great, right? Dustin Wolf, Yaroslav Askarov, Joel Hofer, I don't know how to pronounce his name, having a great season in Springfield. He was a bit of a later round pick. I'm excited to see him succeeding over in Springfield. But number 4 in the AHL for games played is Louis Domingue.
He's been around for a while.
He's been around for a while, right? And good goalie. I think last time I looked at his stuff, he's been in the NHL for 8 seasons. Let me fact check myself here. Yeah, 8 seasons he's been associated with it, with time on an NHL roster, right? But again, you've got him. You got him playing 43 games in Hartford, right? And again, now for the Rangers situation, like, okay, now you know who you have when you're bringing up then, right? But what does that say for your long term? right? There's no guarantee that Shesterkin re-signs in a couple of years when his contract comes up, right? Do you hope you just play the free agent market? Like, I think these are just some considerations that I have lots of questions about. And I wish I had more data, truthfully. I wish I had a better way to answer this question. But again, goaltending is complicated. And I think you see a lot of guys split time between the AHL and the ECHL, not much different than you. And it's such a jarring experience that you've spoken about before. But like, there's times where that transition pieces and spending time in one spot and another can't be helpful for development. And right, this is not about your experiences, but I think yours do speak to what a lot of people would say the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. It's really tough. And it comes down to opportunity, really. Say like Dustin Wolf, who I think is a very, very good goalie, doing well in the American League. They have Vladar and they have Markstrom, two pretty solid goalies, not a lot of opportunities. And then you look, I'm sure he's looking at someone like Devin Levi, who's like, and he's probably like, what the heck?
Yeah.
How come he's their starter now for probably the rest of the season? And it's like, and yes, did he have to earn it for sure, that first start and the second start? But he was also given that opportunity. And so there is no rhyme or reason. And that's why I've always said, like, if you sign to a team, you want it to be a bad team. Sign to the worst possible hockey team that you can go to, because the likelihood of you getting games is high. And that's really important, because all you need is that opportunity. And now Devin Levi, even if he struggles for a long time, he'll consistently be able to get contracts and earn possible opportunities because he took advantage of the opportunity he gets. Maybe Dustin Wolf never gets a solid shot in Calgary, and then he signs somewhere else. And then he signs in, I don't know, Seattle. And Seattle's really good, and he doesn't get a fair shake there. And then you just never know. And it's so hard, and there's so many things. And then people will be like, oh, well, Justin Wolf never panned out. Like, no, he just never got an opportunity.
Yeah. Like, and again, I think it's on like the same thing you said, right? We saw Jet Greaves get a start in Columbus the other night,
Mm-hmm.
right? Jet Greaves is undrafted, played with the Barrie Colts in the OHL, had some like pretty decent seasons there, was one of the goalies who was impacted most, or in that age range, impacted by the COVID year in Canada. But yeah, plays 39 games in Cleveland so far this year and gets an NHL start because Columbus has had a really tough goalie situation if you really want to break down what's taken place in the Columbus organization over the last year, which is, again, like a pretty horrific thing. And if those who don't know what happened to one of the Columbus goaltenders, you can go read about it. But again, there's no way that like Merzlikins wasn't impacted severely by that event last year and his situation this year. So like, but again, like, how do you predict any of that to happen? But now there's someone like Jet Greaves who, those things don't happen. He's probably in the ECHL this year,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they traded Korpisalo, right? Like, Columbus basically moved or had something take place with three goalies, and now you have a guy who gets an NHL game, right? Does that say anything about AHL development, or is it, like you said, are guys just they are what they're going to be, and they get an opportunity they don't, and it might even be as cut and dry as that, or it might be a mix of both. And we always say it depends here, but the answer is it probably is a mix of both.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down, and then we've talked about this too, and we'll get into it more when you present your major junior data and your OHL data. Is I think a lot of these leagues aren't meant for development. The development is done privately by the player and really their private goalie coach over the extended period of time on whatever team they play on. Although I am biased, and I would say that there is a sort of development model in college, although the lack of games does make it really tough too.
I wonder that all the time. Is it better to take a guy in like the NHL draft who's going to go to college at a good college program? I want to make that clear.
Like Michigan Tech, yeah.
Like the Michigan Tech University. Right? But I think there's lots of guys who can go to programs and, who are not going to have great opportunities, right? They're still a great goalie. They're a Division I quality goalie. But just because they're going to have like a place to play for 4 years, in theory, doesn't guarantee development either, right? But it's like, would you rather have that person have a secure place to play with a level of hockey that will likely stay the same? Or do you, again, run into the issue of like, well, we don't really have a spot for him, and then we signed a guy, and then we traded for a guy, and then we bumped someone in our system, and now you're an ECHL goalie, even though you're a third-round draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
And there's countless stories of people who are good goalies, and you just get lost in the ECHL, AHL shuffle. And it's just a reality of the position and a reality of the sport, right?
And it's tough. And it is like, that's the way with, sports and life and all these things, sports replicates life and vice versa. But I think, not to look at this in a completely nihilistic way, but a lot of sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. And sometimes it doesn't matter how good you are. It just, sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. And that sucks. And that sucks. And so someone spoke to me because I got a lot of good reception from the Slang and the Biscuits pod I was on with Trav, where I just talked about some of the realities of, of minor hockey and trying to minor pro, and working your way up and stuff. And I think it's really important for a lot of goalies just to understand and build a lot of the mental tools needed, that if they want to do this, for most, it's a long haul. Some guys just get, they do in reality get it handed to them, and that's, they're right, and that's just life. But for most, it's a long haul. And I think if you're a goalie with this opportunity, be prepared for a lot of frustration and a lot of emotional highs and lows, and play the long game. If you really want that opportunity, play the long game. Like someone like Michael Hauser. Who knows if we ever get back in the NHL, but he was in the Coast American League for a very, very long time until he got his opportunity over the COVID years. And if he'd went to Europe, he never would have got that opportunity. And not that there's anything wrong with going to Europe, but just prepare yourself that sometimes things don't go as well as you want, regardless of the kind of prospect you are. So if you develop the mental tools to be strong and grind through that, I can tip my hat to you, because you did the work and the preparation mentally to possibly set yourself for an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a nice way to really kind of transition to the end of it here. I'm going to end on one thing that I think is so interesting, which is the Picard brothers as this concept of development. And like, so for those who don't know, Chet Picard and Calvin Picard, first round and second round NHL draft pick, goalie brothers. Pretty cool. Like, it's a pretty cool story. Cool. Right. But Chet goes first round in Nashville in 2008. He got 1 year in the AHL, and then they sent him down to Cincinnati in the Coast.
Is he still playing in the Dell?
He's still in the Dell for the Grizzlies Wolfsburg. Oh no, I'm so sorry. He didn't play this year. He's retired.
Oh.
He played last season. Yeah. But yeah, he got 1 year in the AHL. He had like an 892, played 36 games, and then he gets sent down to Cincinnati, where, again, I don't know. This is Cincinnati 12 years ago. So admittedly a long time ago, but has a tough go of it there. And 2 years later, he's in Sweden. Right? And then you kind of look at, and it's interesting you say there, you talked about, like, do guys grind it out? Do they keep pushing? You look at someone like his brother Calvin, who has 116 NHL games. So let's be clear, that's a different story. But he's got 314 AHL ones too.
A lot of games.
It's a lot of games in the AHL. And you know what? Again, he's got 153 career wins over 11 seasons with a .913 career save percentage. He played 43 last year in Grand Rapids with a .918. He's played 35 this year in Bakersfield with a .910. Like, it's one of those things. Obviously, again, he's 30 years old, right? He's turning 31 in 9 days. Happy birthday, Calvin Picard. You know what I mean, though? It's just like, it's these situations that I think are so interesting to me, because what we do, again, it's opportunity mixed with what teams see and who teams draft and who teams get traded, and the miscommunication or intentional communication that occurs within a team system, right?
We just shouldn't expect anything from goalies. We should expect them to be the best that they can be. But if they pan out, perfect. And if they don't, they don't. And I think based on this is it. Like it's just so like it's like how did Devin Levi get an opportunity? He's just got an opportunity because Buffalo hasn't been that great, and they needed him, and they've thought injuries, and like guys like UPL haven't been great, and they have Anderson who is is getting older, and Connery it blew up his knee, and so like
now you have Devin Levi.
Yeah, now you're Devin Levi, and that's awesome for him. And there's so many other goalies like again the Dustin Wolf guy's been grinding it out, having a great year,
Holy
opportunity. And so maybe it's time for people, meaning everyone not involved in an organization, so like fans, to just relax and relax. You don't have to expect all this from your goalies because they're trying. Dustin Wolf's trying his best. He really wants to be there, but he's just not getting the opportunity. And so,
really, holy cow, Jamie, I'm gonna put you on the spot one last time. We're gonna wrap this off. I'm gonna put you on the spot one last time. Nashville has a young man named Yaroslav Askarov. Yaroslav? Am I making that up? Did I forget his name already?
I think it's Yaroslav Askarov.
Okay. I'm sorry if I immediately mess it up. Everyone can laugh at me. That's a tough one. But Askarov's played 45 games in Milwaukee this year. Do you think they need to keep him in the AHL next year, or is he better off playing 20 games in the NHL behind UC Saros next year? Do you have an answer?
He did fine in his NHL game against Montreal, so just let him play, I guess. And if he does terrible, then send him back. But is he going to get that much better?
That's what I mean, right? And this is what I always say too, right? Is do goalies get better, or do they just get acclimated? Are they just used to the game? And right, like and again, we talk about this too, and you can kind of see this probably more at like a major junior level when there's lots of turnover season to season. But like you can have a goalie have like a really great year one year, and then the team loses 3 of their defensemen, and now their numbers go just straight down, right? Because now you're on the same team, but you're playing a totally different game because of the people who are in front of you. And I'm sure you saw that too. You talk about that, the difference between like, where guys are going to be in the AHL. You have no idea where guys are going to be in the ECHL.
Yeah, no, right. Exactly. This is a conundrum that I don't think a lot of people talk about. I don't know if anyone's, until you brought that up. I don't think I've ever considered it. I just assumed that it was. And then when we look at it this way, maybe it's just a place to play.
It's just a spot to either keep people, or you grab a 33-year-old to hang out.
It's a lot quicker of a flight from Cincinnati to Nashville than it is from Gothenburg, Sweden to Nashville.
It sure is, Jamie. But thank you everyone for listening as always. We're really curious to hear what people think. If there's any AHL super fans or anyone who's looked into tracking kind of career projections out of the AHL, contact me. I'm interested.
Please don't contact me because I am significantly less interested, and Ben is the stats guy.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, right? Like it's one of those things where that system it's not changing anytime soon. I don't think the way we treat AHL goalies is going to change anytime in the future, especially since, if those people didn't know, sometimes NHL and AHL teams aren't owned by the same people. And there is inconsistencies between owner desires and coordination. But yeah, if you're on a podcast app, again, hit that subscribe button, send it to a friend. If you're on YouTube, that like button is Jamie's best friend. If you're on Patreon, send me a PayPal offer instead of signing up for Jamie's Patreon. I would appreciate it. I don't get any money off that, but also then go sign up for Jamie's Patreon as well. Jamie, I've tried to shill out for you. Do you have anything final to say?
No, thanks for selling your soul. Thanks for everyone for listening, watching. We do appreciate it. We do appreciate all the comments, the shares and stuff. See you guys next week.
Until next time.